Romans 7:7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law said, thou shalt not covet.
Now, Creflo Dollar, we're probably going to put the clip in here somewhere.
Now, I know for some it may be a little confusion because in the King James it says the wages of sin is death. And yet in the Mirror Bible it says the rewards of the law is death. Well, how do you hook that together? Well, first of all, understand the devil is not trying to get you to sin. He's just trying to get you to keep the law. Because if he can get you to keep the law, you will sin. You see, Romans chapter 7 says, for without the law, sin was dead. There is no sin without a law. There's no transgression of a speed limit if there's, first of all, not a law that gives you a limit, a speed limit. So without the law, there is no sin. Without the law, sin will have no opportunity. And what many people think, they think Satan's trying to get you to sin. And Satan's trying to tempt you to do this or to do that. No. All he's trying to get you to do is to keep the law.
Creflo Dollar said that Satan wants us to keep the law because the law will cause us to sin. Right? Now, the funny part is that technically, it sort of can make sense if you're a Christian, right?
Right.
Because if you're not, now obviously it doesn't make sense and I'm going to say why, but in a Christian's mind it's like, oh, if I keep the law and I break it, then I sin. But if I don't keep the law at all, then I can't break it, which means that I can't sin.
Right.
Obviously, and it makes sense logically in a Christian's mind, but it's foolishness because if you're not keeping the law, then you're breaking it anyways.
Right. Most of them don't understand anyway that it's the law that defines sin.
Exactly.
Without the law, we wouldn't know what is right.
Exactly.
Right. But
we're going to get into that through precept because it's interesting what Paul says here, because he says, without the law, I would have not known sin. Why? How can he say this? How can he come to this understanding? Right? He says, although, like I said, although the idea that Creflo Dollar brings is completely idiotic for the reason that breaking, but whether you keep the law or if you keep the law and you break it, it's actually much worse not to keep the law at all, right?
Exactly.
So the idea that the law is sin has spread throughout the churches.
Yes.
Since he brought that out on TV, the idea that the law is sin amongst the Christian churches has spread like a wildfire. Right? But Paul says here that the law is not sin because by the law we are made aware of sin. Right? If a warning isn't issued about the coronavirus, then if somebody gets the coronavirus around you, then you don't know what the coronavirus looks like. You don't know that it exists. So you may think that the person next to you is coming down with a common cold. And now you're ignorant of it altogether. But because of the law, we are made aware of sin. Therefore, you know what coveting looks like.
Exactly.
You know what coveting is because the scriptures told you what coveting is. It makes you aware of sin rather than ignorant to it.
Right.
Because then you're just keeping the same sin, just in ignorance. Right?
Right.
What the law has allowed us to do is make a distinction between what is good and what is evil. Right. Something that the heathen did not possess because they weren't given the law. Why do you think the heathen are the heathen? Because they have no idea what sin is. You know, they're around here sleeping with beasts and everything, and to them it's normal. Right?
Exactly.
If a person, like for you, if you go over to your friend's house and you taste their mom's spaghetti tastes like garbage, but to your friend it tastes like the best thing in the world. Why? Because they've grown up eating it, so it seems normal to them. For you, you haven't eaten anything like that before. So for you, it's disgusting. It's like, it don't taste like my mama. You know, and it's the same thing here.
Right.
We grew the Israelites had a law. We grew up with knowing the difference between what is good and what is evil, whereas the heathen, they weren't given the law in the first place. Let's get that in Psalms chapter 147, verse 19. That's a precept. Psalms 147, verse 19.
Psalms 147, 19. He showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. Verse 20. He hath not dealt so with any nation.
He hath not dealt so with any nation. Read.
And as far as his judgments, they have not known them.
They have not known them.
Praise ye the Lord.
Praise ye the Lord. So the same things that we're aware of, the same sins that we're aware of, they aren't. So that's why Paul says what he says here. He says, if not by the law, I would have not known sin.
That's right.
I would have known sin if not by the law. Right?
That's right.
Our nation walks and behaves different, unlike any other nation on the planet, even still. Right? Without the law, our people still had some sort of moral standard, a certain place we wouldn't go to. Right? Oh, that's white people stuff. That's white people stuff. I ain't never do that.
Right.
See. So even the way we walk, talk, and behave is unlike any other nation because we have a unique spirit that was placed in us by the Most High, right? That makes us different because of the word and the statutes and the commandments that was established with us from the beginning.
That's right.
It automatically makes us different. We have a differentiation, a conscience, a natural conscience between what is good and what is evil.
That's right.
Unlike so many of the Christian church believe that the law is flesh rather than spirit, which is why they believe that it's sin. Because they believe that the law is flesh, right? The law is carnal. It's something that's, when you kept the law it's a carnal thing. It's something that you do on the outside, but it don't got nothing to do with the inside. That's why Christ came and he made it about the inside and not about the outside. But Paul makes it clear that the law was spirit first. Where do you think because when we read the book of Jubilees, where did Moses say he copied down the book of Jubilees from? The heavenly tablets, right?
Tablets.
So it is spirit first. It's literally spirit first.
Yeah.
So the word literally is spirit first. I mean, it came from a spirit. So the law itself is spirit, right?
That's right.
It is spirit and it is understanding, and Paul confirms this according to precept, right? But does everybody have understanding concerning what Paul said about is the law sin? All right.
Everybody got clarity on that? Yes, I did. Okay, good stuff.
Let's get Romans chapter 7, verse 12. Is the law spirit or is it flesh?
Romans 7 and 12. Wherefore, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, and just, and good.
So, no, the law isn't sin. Read.
Verse 13. Was then that which is good made death unto me?
Okay, so the question that he's asking here is, since the law is good, is it made death? Is the law now sin? Is the law now evil? Can something that the Most High made good be made now evil? Read.
Was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me, that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful.
Okay, now Paul has opened up a can of worms that a lot of people don't understand. See, this right here is where somebody who doesn't understand scripture would get really, really, really confused. Because you have no idea what the heck Paul just said here. But sin, that it might appear to be sin, working death in me by that which is good. You have to understand that even when you keep the law, when you break the law, it becomes easier to break the law again.
That's right.
That's why repentance is so important. So it says, but sin, that it might appear sin, working death by me, which is good, right? Because the law is good, right? So when you break the law, it becomes easier for you to break the law again. I remember when I was watching The Office one day, it said Stanley walked in and he saw that the guy was that he was married and there was another female in his room. He said, "Watch out, it only gets easier." Right, because there was a situation where he had got caught cheating earlier in the series, and he said, "Watch out, it only gets easier." Right? It's the same thing that Christ is saying, that Paul is saying here, and he's alluding to a sin nature within a person. Right? The flesh wants to sin, whereas the spirit wants to do good. So he's saying that sin is sin, and sin does appear to be sin. Right?
That's right.
And it's working death in me by that which is good. how can so it's not that the law itself is evil.
Right.
It's that when you break the law, it only becomes easier to break it again, because when you break the law, you have satisfied your flesh.
Yes. That's right.
It's like a 600-pound. It's like somebody on My 600-Pound Life staying on a strict diet and then eating a Twinkie. You just basically almost about to go all the way back, because now you stuck on the Twinkie diet, right? It just sent you all the way back. You understand what I'm saying? It's the same thing. This is what Paul is saying here. See, the unlearned wouldn't know that.
That's right.
They would see it as, oh, so the law, which is good, is causing somebody to sin. No, it's that the sin nature within you, when you break the law, it becomes easier for you to break the law again.
That's right.
That's why it says that sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful. Let's get verse 14. Is it spirit or is it carnal?
Verse 14. For we know that the law is spiritual. But
That is what?
That it is spiritual.
That is what?
It is spiritual.
Read.
But I am carnal.
But I am carnal.
Sold under sin.
That's the problem. It's not that there's an issue with the law itself. It's not that there's an issue with the writings of the law itself. It's an issue with us keeping it. It's an issue with what happened with Adam and Eve in the beginning.
Right.
The sin nature that entered into the man. That's the issue. He says the law is spiritual, but I am carnal. Sold under sin. Because I am sold under sin, my desire is not to do the law, which is spiritual. That's the issue. That's the conflict between the law and man. The conflict between the law and man is because we are two different things. Our desires are two different places.
Right.
Right? Can two walk together lest they be agreed? Right? You have a spiritual thing here, which is the desires to do good, and you have a carnal thing which is desires to do evil, and they do not mix. Paul says, whenever I want to do good, my body's telling me no.
That's right.
Right? Because his body is carnal. He says, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal. That's what makes keeping the law so hard.
That's right.
Get verse 15 for me.
Verse 15. Did I miss something here? One moment. Might have moved ahead too.
Might have moved ahead a little bit.
Hold on a second.
Right there.
Okay.
Right there.
Verse 15. That which I do, I allow not.
That which I do, I allow not. Read.
For what I would, that I do not.
No. Follow. See, this is also where somebody who's unlearned and unstable would get confused. Once he starts flipping back between the word, because I do, that I do not, and I do what I don't do, and what I try to do, what I don't. Just listen really closely, and I promise you'll get it. Start from the beginning of verse 15 again.
For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that I do not. But what I hate, that I do.
See, it makes sense once you think about it. Once you clue in and you understand what Paul is saying here. He says, that which I do, I allow not. What I want to do, I don't do. Right?
That's right.
He says, for what I would, that do I not. He said, what I would do, I'm not going to do that either. But what I hate, that's what I'm going to do. Because he realized that whatever is adverse to him is the right thing. He said, if I'm doing something and it feels good, it ain't right. Because that means my flesh is satisfied. At all moments, my flesh should be uneasy. My flesh should be uncomfortable. If my flesh is comfortable, something is wrong. That's why he says, for that I do, I allow not. He said, I'm not going to allow that. If I'm comfortable, I'm not going to allow that. If that's what my flesh wants, I'm not going to allow it. When he's thinking about something that he's going to do in the future, that which I would do, I don't do it. But what I hate, what I despise, when I have to get up early on the Sabbath and go to the synagogue every single Sabbath and read from the same law over and over again. They always want to read from Isaiah chapter 7. Every single week, they want to read from Isaiah chapter 7. I don't know why. And I got to get up and we got to read that. And I got to stand up and I got to debate with them about Christ again.
Right.
That which I hate, that do I.
Yes, it's the struggle between the flesh and the spirit.
Exactly. And he chooses the spirit.
That's right.
Because when you strengthen your spirit and you weaken your flesh, it becomes that much easier to keep the law. Because now you're becoming stronger in your spirit, which makes you more compatible with the law. Right? Because we're three. We're flesh, we're soul, and we're spirit.
That's right.
So you have to figure out a way to get that spirit and to keep that spirit and that flesh from being 50-50. If you can get that flesh to be 25 and your spirit to be 75, you're 75% more likely to be compatible with the law. If your flesh is at 75 and your spirit is at 25, I promise you ain't keeping the law.
That's right.
I promise you're not. You're not keeping the Sabbath. You're not, most likely, you're not keeping the dietary laws either. I mean, come on.
I mean, it was Paul himself that said, hey, listen, I buffet my flesh.
Mm-hmm.
He beats it into subjection.
Exactly.
It doesn't want to do right, but he beats it into subjection.
Exactly.
Right, so.
Go ahead and read verse 16.
Verse 16. If then do I that which I would not, I consent unto the law that is good.
Okay, so he says, if then I do that which I would not, he says something that I don't want to do. If I do something that I don't want to do, I consent unto the law that is good. Right? So he's saying by doing what I don't want to do, which ultimately is against my flesh, I am building my spirit, which means that it makes me more likely to do good, which is the law. It's not that hard to understand. It's not as difficult as it seems. But somebody who is unlearned and unstable and doesn't understand exactly what Paul is saying or the intentions of Paul,
right,
you would think that Paul is saying something else. Paul said, listen, he's giving the understanding of who we are versus what the law is. If you're not compatible with somebody, then you're not compatible with that person. And it's the same thing with the law and with man. We're two totally different types of things. This is a spirit, this is a man. I'm carnal, that is spiritual. So how am I gonna be as a carnal man more in touch with the law? I have to be more spirit than carnal.
That's right.
That means doing what you hate rather than doing what's gonna satisfy your flesh. Let's get verse 17.
Verse 17. Now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me.
So he's saying now when I sin, if I were to slip up, it's not me that does it, it's the sin that dwelleth in me, the sin nature. The slip, something that you do in that small moment and you catch it and it's like, oh, Father, I repent for that.
That's right.
So you see a female walking by and you walk by and you look a little bit too long. Oh shoot, dang, I done slipped up. Right? It's not necessarily that you consciously sinned. It was an unconscious sin. That's he said that's not me that do it. It wasn't a conscious decision for me to do it, but the sin that dwelleth in me. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. We can't expect for ourselves not to slip. That's what Peter is saying. That's what Paul is saying. You can't sit up here and expect for yourself to be exactly like Christ. The goal is to be like Christ. Right. But ultimately, if you can get to the point where it's you no more that sins, but the sin that's in you, right, you're doing something right. That means that you're beating your flesh into subjection.
That's right. There's too many of us that fall to premeditated sin. Where you actually sit and you're thinking about how you're going to make this thing happen. You know, you're trying to strategize on how and when or how you can accomplish something without being caught. You know, that premeditation, that planning out, that's where you want to be careful. Exactly. Because then that's a decision that you're making, you know, to commit that sin. That's premeditated. I guess I could coin that phrase. Yes. Premeditated sin.
Exactly. So it says, now then it is no more I that do it, but the sin that dwelleth in me. He says, it's not me making that sin anymore. I'm not premeditating. I'm not sitting there thinking about how I'm going to sin. It happens in that moment. I catch it. I repent.
Right.
And it was, and I understand that it was the sin. It was the sin nature. It was that flesh that caused that slip. And I can come back and I can and I can make it better.
That's right.
And I can get better off of it.
That's right, unless it's premeditated.
Unless it's premeditated.
That's right.
But closing this particular part, understanding. Listen. Oh man,
That's all right. That happens sometimes. That's all right.
All right. Okay. So the law is spiritual. Man is carnal. They don't mix. That's why it's so hard for you to keep the law. That's why it's so difficult for you to get up and strive and continue to push to keep the law and do this and do that and get dressed on Sabbath and come and do Sabbath and teach and do all these different things and study. That's why it's so hard, because we're physically not for the law, right? But you have to force yourself.
Right.
Don't do what you want to do. Do what you hate, and you beat your flesh into submission. You make your flesh weak, and you build your spirit. Make your spirit strong, and that's how you become compatible with the law.
Right. We haven't done our due diligence in terms of conditioning ourselves. All right. We go through the week, just dealing with everything else that comes within our life, but we don't take that time, to commit to the Most High, to buffet our flesh. There's going to be times when we're too tired. We don't feel like doing it. But what did Paul say? He said, I buffet my flesh. I beat my flesh into subjection. I make myself submit to that which I know needs to be done. So in that way, as we continue on with this walk, it gets easier and easier to submit to the Spirit. Right? But if we're not feeding our spirit, and we're more so committing and feeding the flesh, that's what you're going to give yourself to.
And you also have to remember what they were preparing themselves for. They weren't the disciples and the prophets and Paul, the disciples and Peter and Paul, they weren't thinking about the end of the world happening in our lifetime. They're thinking about it happening in theirs.
That's right.
They were preparing for the coming of Christ in their time.
That's right.
Right? So what was Paul building his spirit for? The hour of temptation that was prophesied. Right? How can you stand in the hour of temptation? Right?
Come on.